months ago, you authorized the sale of bonds, and that sale has occurred, and Mark Walker is here to tell you the good news about what rates we got on those bonds.
Commissioners, I do bring you good news today. You may recall that a key component of funding our budget this year was the issuance of bonds in the electric, gas, and wastewater divisions, $110 million total. We did go to market approximately 2 weeks ago on November the 28th, and we did sell the bonds. They were sold through the public competitive bid process, as we always do. And you may have read in the press and all, but municipal bond rates are at their lowest levels going back to the Lyndon Johnson administration in the 1960s. And that was evidenced in the rates that we received on our bonds. So we're very pleased with the results. As a reminder, the proceeds of these bonds are going to be used to fund system capital improvements for the respective systems. So I'm going to take just a few moments and go through each respective sale for you and share with you the results. Starting with the electric bonds, a total of $35 million in electric system revenue bonds were sold. We received 9 bids on the bonds on November the 28th, which is a relatively high number compared to historic bidding. The low-cost bid was 2.89%, and the low-cost bidder was an investment banking firm named Piper Jaffray. They are a global investment banking asset management firm. They are headquartered in Minneapolis. They'll be the lead underwriter on this, and in all cases, there's a syndicate of other underwriters that typically join with them. But a low-cost bid of 2.89%. The bonds will mature over a period of 30 years, 2013 through 2042. You may recall in the past that we typically did 20-year, go out as far as 20 years for electric bonds, but as part of our Century 2 funding plan for electric, the board requested that we extend that out further. So now we go out 30 years for at least over the course of the Century 2 funding plan. The bonds did receive strong credit ratings, as is typically the case from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. But just quickly, as a point of comparison for the 2.89, it was at this time last year that we sold $25 million in water bonds, and generally over the same maturity of 30 years, going out 30 years. The low-cost bid on that was 3.82%. So you can see over the course of the past 12 months that muni bond rates have continued to fall, and almost 100 basis points lower than where we were at this time last year. So again, very pleased with that. The bids themselves that we received for the electric bonds, you can see the various investment houses that bid, and also each respective bid in terms of the true interest cost. And as I mentioned, Piper Jaffray at 2.892% was the low bid. You'll see the spread between the high and the low is about 66 basis points, which is relatively high. Morgan Stanley bid 3.55. They're really considered an outlier. If you excluded them from the group, then the spread's about 22, 23 basis points, which is more the norm, what you see historically. And then to bring the board up to date on the total picture for electric division debt, and I'll have one of these slides for each division as we go through the other two systems that issued, but including the $35 million that was just issued, we have a total of $187 million in outstanding electric bonds that will be paid back over the next 30 years. The interest cost on those bonds is $83 million. The amount of principal that will be paid over the course of the next decade, which is a feature that we have in our debt management policy, that for electric we require at least 30% over the next 10 years. Right now we're around 50%. So the average life of all our outstanding electric debt's about 11 years at this point in time. The division's debt ratio at $187 million in outstanding bonds is 39%. And our funding plan for electric calls that it can get up to as high as 45%, and it will increase over time. We have an electric bond issue planned every other year. So 2 years from now, we'll be looking at issuing about $50 to $55 million. Actually, it'll increase a little bit. So we expect that debt ratio to steadily increase to the 45% level over the next 5 years or so. And then just to put the low rate on the new money into perspective, The total average rate on our outstanding debt is now 3.82%. Before this issue, it was 4.04. So you can see the impact of how it drove the overall average rate down. And the graph on the right-hand side just simply shows electric debt service over the next 30 years. Principal and interest payments combined. Just a couple of things to point out to you. You may notice FY13, why is that so low? We've already made our principal payments for the electric system for this year. That's made in July. So that has already been done. That's why that looks low. Then you see the new issue goes out longer than the existing debt. And again, this is a 30-year. Historically, we've done 20 years. So this graph just illustrates that. And that's the electric system. For gas, $10 million in gas system revenue bonds. We had 5 bidders for that. The low-cost bid was 2.46%. So about 40 basis points lower than electric. And the reason for that was these bonds only go out 20 years. So you don't go out as far on the yield curve on that. The low-cost bidder was UBS Financial Services, large investment banking house headquartered in New York. And of the 5 bids, you can see again the investment houses, UBS the lowest at 2.458 or 2.46. Highest was JP Morgan at 2.70. So you've got that about that 20, 25 basis point spread there. And looking at the gas profile, not as much outstanding debt as the other systems, a little under $100 million in total. That's roughly $40 million in interest cost over the next 20 years. The amount of principal to be paid down in the next decade is about 53%, very similar to electric. Debt ratio 39%. Unlike electric, that we expect that ratio to actually decrease somewhat excuse me, over time, whereas electric will be increasing slightly over time. And the weighted interest cost, average interest rate on all outstanding gas bonds, 3.62. It was about 3.8 before this issue. And moving on to wastewater, this was the largest of the 3 issues, $65 million in revenue bonds. We received 10 bids, and that is the largest number of bids that I can recall, at least in my career. Again, just shows a strong demand for municipal debt at this point in time. The low-cost bidder was Southwest Securities, a national investment banking house. They are headquartered in Dallas. True interest cost, 3.04%. And for debt going out almost 35 years, again, that's really amazing. A point of comparison on that, the last time we did wastewater debt, it was a $70 million issue 2 years ago. It was around 3.8%. So again, you can see how much it's fallen in the last couple of years. The 10 bids reflected on this chart, Commissioner, Southwest Securities, you can see 3042. I will point out here there was a very close second with JP Morgan at 3046. So we actually go out a lot more decimal points than that. I rounded it down for presentation purposes, but it was very close. And then total wastewater debt, as you know, we have quite a bit, especially we've been issuing relatively large issues since 2005 with the consent decree. We have $456 million in outstanding bonds now for wastewater, $407 million in interest payments on that over the next 35 years. You'll see that the amount of principal paid back in the next 10 years is quite a bit different than electric and gas, and only about 21% over the next decade. And that is in compliance with our debt management policy, but it's much lower because we've been doing longer-term debt for wastewater since 2005. And probably 90% of this $456 million has been issued since 2005 and the consent decree. So that's why that statistic is so much lower than electric and gas. The division's current debt ratio is 65%. It will stay in that range from 60 to 65 probably for the next 5-7 years. And then as we get to 2018, afterwards the bond issues will become a little bit less. You still have the rate increases every other year. You'll see that debt ratio begin to slowly decline and get below 60%, probably by 2020 or something like that. Weighted interest cost, you would expect it to be higher given the term of the debt. 4.16%, it was 4.35 before this latest issue. And then finally, close out on just a summary of the issuance cost associated with the sale of the $110 million in bonds in total. It is broken out by the firm or agency we will pay the fees to, and as you can see, our financial advisor is Cumberland Securities, bond counsel Bass, Berry & Sims, and the fees that we pay them are established by contract. So, and those fees will be paid shortly, and they are paid out of the proceeds of the bonds, which is typically the case. The rating agencies charge us for rating each series of the bonds, so you can see their fees there for Moody's and Standard & Poor's. But in total, $383,000, that's about 1/3 of 1% of the par value of the bonds, and that is consistent with what we've seen for many, many years. And that's all I had. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I will mention that, again, the proceeds of these bonds are for funding capital improvements. You may recall a couple of months ago, the board approved a refinancing of about $170 million. City councils approved that as well. We'd like to go to market with that sometime in January.
Mark, with us having so many people bidding, is that an indication that the economy is coming back maybe? Because I know at one point we didn't have hardly any, or you really can't tell. What do you think that's an indication?
I think it's more of an indication that people are still looking at the safe haven of tax-exempt debt. And sometimes when, well, I would like to be able to say that, and of course there's been a lot of publication about the fiscal cliff. And one thing is, which would be bad for the economy, if nothing was done to avert the fiscal cliff, most people are saying that's a continued boon for municipal bonds. And that corporate tax rates are going to go up, people are going to be looking more so to tax-exempt debt.
Well, I knew the interest rates were low, which are great for us, but not necessarily for the economy, so I was trying to put a little positive spin on it.
Sorry. I hope you're right. I would like to see. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mark, first of all, job well done and keep up the good work. I think it's fascinating to see low rates and we're saving money all around. I think I asked you earlier, there will be some more issues for wastewater in a couple of years, new issues with bonds.
Yes, sir. We're on a cycle right now as far as new money bonds. That water is every other year, but water last occurred December of 2011, so fall of 2013 is our next expected water issue. Then you could look approximately 2 years after that for water. Electric and wastewater, right now, again, every 2 years. So fall of 2014, we'll be back with electric and wastewater again. Gas is a little different. Its capital needs aren't as great, so it's typically on a 2 to 3 year cycle, but there will be plenty more debt issues.
So I know we have our debt ratios to consider in our debt management policy, but does it make sense at all to look, given the wonderful climate for issuing bonds, to sell any of these, to do it sooner than we might need, just to take advantage of the way the market is and the wonderful rates?
I think there's a possibility. You're limited to how much you can do in that it has to go to fund capital improvements, and you can only do so much as your capital program provides for, and then you've got to balance that, as you mentioned, with the various financial indicators. But, for example, the water bond issue that we would typically do in the fall, a year from now, there may be an opportunity to potentially accelerate that, depending upon if we've drawn down all our proceeds from the last issue. That's the key. We just have to look at all the factors, but I do think there are some opportunities to maybe accelerate on a limited basis.
So I know we're proceeding with Century 2, but we have a scaled back version from what was planned 5 years ago, right? We're not quite as aggressive as we thought we were going to be when we first developed the Century 2 plan. Is that correct?
I think we kicked it back up.
But we kicked it back up in 2011. So we're at that.
I was going to ask, if we were really as aggressive as 5 years ago, would we be issuing, would it be more bonds issued now, or higher dollars, or it's just the same? And I guess if we're not anymore, if we didn't scale it back,